Story 1.
It's strange how certain sounds can transport you back in time. For me, it's the creaking of old floorboards. I grew up in a rickety old house in Louisiana, surrounded by swamps and old legends. My parents were often working late, leaving me to fend for myself from a young age. I got used to the solitude, the quiet, that is, until one particular evening changed everything. I was about 12 years old. The air was heavy with an impending storm, and the house felt more oppressive than usual. My parents called to say they'd be even later than usual due to the weather. No problem, I thought. I had my trusty dog Buster and a stack of comic books to keep me company. Little did I know company was the last thing I would want that night. As the rain started to patter against the windows, Buster suddenly perked up, his ears twitching towards the front door. A low growl rumbled in his throat. I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing, then a faint tapping. I figured it was just a branch against the window, but Buster was faxied on the door. The tapping continued, growing more insistent. Hesitantly, I approached the door, Buster's growls growing louder. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing but the storm's fury. Just as I was about to turn away, the doorknob began to turn slowly. I hadn't locked it yet. My heart raced as I slammed the deadbolt in place. Suddenly, the house was filled with the sound of someone or something pounding on the walls. It was as if the storm outside had come alive, seeking entry. Buster was barking furiously now, his eyes darting to every corner of the room. I grabbed him and ran upstairs, locking us in my room. Their pounding continued, moving around the house like a sentient being. I could hear the wind howling, blending with what I was sure were whispers. It was saying something, a name perhaps, but whose? I huddled with Buster, feeling the room grow colder, the air thicker. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours. The storm raged on, and with each flash of lightning I imagined I saw figures outside my window. Faces twisted in anger or despair. I couldn't tell. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but I knew I had to be silent, to wait. Finally, as suddenly as it had begun, the pounding stopped. The storm seemed to move away, the whispers fading with it. I didn't dare move until the sun began to peek through the clouds. When I finally crept downstairs, the house was silent, too silent. Buster was tense, niffing at the air, his tail between his legs. Outside the yard was a mess, branches and leaves everywhere. But there was something else, footprints, a set of them leading to the house and then away into the woods. They were too large to be human, the spacing all wrong. I followed them until they disappeared into the swamp, swallowed by the mud and water. My parents found me there, staring into the murky depths. I tried to explain, but what could I say? Who would believe such a story? They chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the ferocity of the storm. But I knew what I heard, what I saw. I never felt safe in that house again, always listening, waiting for the return of whatever had visited that night. Years have passed, and I've moved away, but sometimes in the dead of night, I wake to the sound of tapping, soft but insistent. And I wonder if it's finally come back for me. Or perhaps it never left at all.
Story 2.
Every small town has its secrets, and mine was no exception. I grew up in a sleepy community in Ohio, where stories and rumors spread as quickly as wildfire. My family lived in an old Victorian house at the edge of town, close enough to hear the whispers of the woods that bordered our backyard. I was 12, a latchkey kid with a love for mystery novels, not realizing I was about to live in one. It was an ordinary Thursday evening in October, the kind where the sunset paints the sky a deep crimson, signaling the change of seasons. My parents were working late, a common occurrence, leaving me to fend for myself until they returned. I didn't mind the solitude. It gave me time to dive into my books and let my imagination roam free. However, that night, my imagination would become a little too real. As I was preparing a simple dinner of mac and cheese, the doorbell rang. It was early for trick-or-treaters, and we rarely had visitors. With a hesitant step, I approached the door, peering through the peephole. No one was there. I shrugged it off as a prank by neighborhood kids and returned to the kitchen. But then, the doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I approached the door once more. Still, no one was there. Feeling uneasy, I made sure the door was locked and decided to eat in the living room, closer to the front door. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, soft and slow, coming from the second floor. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. We had no pets, and I was supposedly alone. My heart raced as I considered my options. The footsteps continued, deliberate and heavy, as if someone was searching for something or someone. I grabbed the cordless phone, my hands trembling as I dialed my parents' number. No answer. I then dialed 911, whispering my address and the situation. The operator's calm voice was a small comfort, but the footsteps were getting louder, closer. I hid behind the sofa, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The operator instructed me to stay quiet and stay put. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I waited, the footsteps moving throughout the house, sometimes pausing, then starting again. Then, as sudden as they began, they stopped. The house was silent, except for my ragged breathing. The operator reassured me help was on the way, but it felt like the intruder could still be there, waiting. Police sirens finally pierced the night, and I heard voices and footsteps, this time from the officers. It was only when they called out, assuring me it was safe, that I dared to emerge from my hiding spot. The officers found no one, and no signs of forced entry. Everything was as it should be, except for a window upstairs, wide open, which I was sure had been closed. My parents arrived soon after, full of worry and questions. I recounted the story, but it seemed to make no sense. The police suggested maybe it was the wind or the house settling, common in old homes like ours. But I knew what I heard. I spent many nights afterward, jumping at every sound, wondering if the footsteps would return, if the open window was an invitation that had been accepted. The incident became another whispered story in town, a spooky anecdote to share during sleepovers or around campfires. But to me, it remained a haunting memory, a night of fear and unanswered questions. The house felt different after that. Even as I grew up and moved away, I could never shake the feeling that something had been there with me, unseen, walking the hallways of my childhood home. And sometimes, when I visit, I pause and listen, half expecting to hear the soft tread of footsteps, a reminder of the night I was not alone.
Story 3.
I remember the night like it was painted in front of me, a chilling portrait of fear. It was in the heart of winter in rural Pennsylvania, where the snow blankets everything in a deceptive calm. I was 11, often left to my own devices in our old family home while my parents worked late. The house, with its creaking floors and drafty halls, had always felt big and empty, but that night it felt like a world of its own. I had just settled down with a hot chocolate, the TV remote in hand, ready to dive into an evening of cartoons, a welcome escape from the silence of the house. Then, a knock at the door shattered my peace. It was odd, the timing, in the thick of a snowstorm when no one ever ventured out. But there it was again, a knock, insistent and hard. My heart pounded as I approached the door, the wind howling like a warning cry. Peeking out, I saw nothing but the swirling snow, the world a blur of white. I opened the door a crack, the cold biting my face. "Hello," I called out, my voice small against the storm. No answer, just the wind and a set of footprints leading to the doorstep, then disappearing. I closed the door, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. The house suddenly felt colder, as if the door had let in more than just the chill. I tried to return to my cartoons, but the sense of something wrong lingered, a prickling at the back of my neck. I decided to check the locks on the windows and doors, a routine my parents had drilled into me. As I moved from room to room, the house seemed to creak more than usual, the shadows deeper. When I reached the back of the house, I froze. The back door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peering through. My heart raced. Had I forgotten to lock it, or had someone opened it? I approached slowly, every step echoing loudly in my ears. Then a sudden crash from upstairs jolted me into a run. I dashed up the stairs, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. My room, my sanctuary, was a mess. The window was wide open, the curtains flapping wildly in the wind. Snow was dusting the floor, the room as cold as the outside. I slammed the window shut, locking it tight, my hands trembling. I turned to survey the damage, and that's when I noticed it. The closet door slightly open, a darkness looming within. I approached slowly, every horror story I'd ever heard playing in my mind. With a shaky hand, I flung the door open. Clothes, toys, nothing out of the ordinary. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Just as I was about to close the door, a soft thud from behind the coats made me pause. My heart in my throat, I pushed the clothes aside. And that's when I saw it. A box, old and dusty, one I'd never seen before. It was out of place, hidden yet demanding attention. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I opened it. Inside were trinkets, old photographs, and a diary, the entries dating back decades. The writing was frantic, filled with tales of strange happenings in the house, of shadows and whispers and things that weren't quite right. The last entry was unfinished, a sentence cut off, the pen dropped in a hurry. I heard a sound then, a whisper like a sigh. The house groaned, the wind howled, and I felt it, a presence as if the opening of the box had awakened something. I closed it quickly, shoving it back into the darkness of the closet. But the feeling didn't go away, the sense that I wasn't alone. From that night on, the house felt different. Objects moved, lights flickered, and sometimes in the dead of night, I'd hear whispers, the soft thud of footsteps on the stairs. My parents laughed it off as an overactive imagination, but I knew it was more. I'd unleashed something, or perhaps I'd just become aware of what was always there. Years have passed, and I've left that old house behind, but the memory of that night, of the box and the whispers, stays with me. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I wonder about the box, about the diary and the tales it held. I wonder if the house is still there, standing against the snow, its secrets buried deep within. And I wonder if someone else has heard the knock, has felt the presence I left behind. But those are questions for another time, for another brave soul to uncover. For me, it's a chapter closed, a story to be told but not relived. A chilling reminder of the night I spent alone, in a house that was never really empty.
Story 4.
Growing up in a small, dusty town in Nevada, I was no stranger to tales of the unexplained and the bizarre. The desert has a way of keeping its secrets, whispering them only to those who dare to listen. My family's house, an old structure on the outskirts of town, had always been a subject of local lore, rumored to be one of the oldest in the area. I was 14, old enough to be left alone while my parents worked late at their jobs in town. I didn't mind the solitude. It gave me time to explore the nooks and crannies of our home, each room filled with relics of the past. But one late October evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, my love for solitude would be tested. I was in the living room, the television casting flickering light across the walls, when a knock at the door startled me from my reverie. Our visitors were few and far between, especially as night crept upon the desert. With a sense of unease, I approached the door, peering through the dusty window pane. There was a man standing there, his features obscured by the setting sun behind him. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place against the backdrop of our rustic home. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door. The man introduced himself in a low, gravelly voice, claiming to be researching the history of the local houses. Something about him set my nerves on edge, the way he never quite met my eyes, the odd, formal way he spoke, as if from another time. Yet I found myself answering his questions, telling him about our home and the generations that had lived within its walls. As the conversation drew on, I noticed the temperature drop, a chill seeping into the bones of the house. The man's questions grew more peculiar, focusing on whether I ever felt like I was being watched or if I had experienced anything unexplainable within the house. A sense of dread grew within me, my initial curiosity turning to alarm. I excused myself, citing an early morning at school, and closed the door firmly behind the man. But as I turned to walk away, a cold breeze swept through the hallway, the lights flickering and dying for a brief moment. When they came back, I felt it, an oppressive presence, as if the air itself was heavy with expectation. The night grew restless. Sounds echoed through the house, whispers of movement that had no source. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, the old house settling, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if the very walls were alive, holding their breath. I didn't sleep that night, jumping at every creak and groan. When dawn finally broke, casting light into the shadowed corners, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But the relief was short-lived. As I made my way through the house, I found something that chilled me to the core. In the living room, right where the stranger had stood, were footprints, old and worn into the wood as if they'd been there for ages, yet I had never noticed them before. They led to the fireplace, where a single charred page lay among the ashes, a page filled with my family's history, names and dates scrawled in elegant handwriting. I never saw the stranger again, nor did I experience anything as unsettling as that night. But sometimes, when the desert wind howls and the skies turn the color of fire, I feel it, that sense of something ancient and unknowable, watching from the shadows. And I wonder if the man was not a man at all, but a messenger from the past, reminding me that some secrets are best left buried in the desert sands.